Um, and the third major factor that I've looked at this year is Saturn in Capricorn. Saturn entered Capricorn right when we entered 2018 for the first of 3 years that Saturn is Saturn in Capricorn. Saturn entered Capricorn right when we entered 2018 for the first of 3 years that Saturn is Saturn in Capricorn. When we started streaming on YouTube, something went wacky. 2018.
Am I unmuted?
Yeah. Thank you. Oh, was that just coming from your computer? That was just coming from your computer, Marcelo. Huh. Okay. Anyway, pretty wild experience. And so, anyway, Saturn entered Capricorn the beginning of this year for the first of 3 years. And I've been defining the main Saturn and Capricorn need as the need to get very real about how you use your power and how you deal with the structure of time itself, how you use time and how you use power. Because it turns out if you go deep enough into the way you work with time, you're simultaneously getting real about how you deal with power. Time and power were linked in the ancient astrologers under the sign of Capricorn. And I think there's a profound mystery there because time turns out to be one of the greatest mysteries of all. Time doesn't just move the way they say it does in Western culture. Almost everybody on Earth falls into the idea that time gets divided up. There are 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, 24 hours in a day, 7 days in a week, 52 weeks in a year, 100 years in a century. And we all buy that. And it's not that that is totally false. It's not totally an illusion. But what is delusional is to think that that's the only way that time operates. And so it's the dominant culture. It's the dominant way to believe is that, I'm 64 years old and this is November and so forth. And it's not totally wrong, but the fiction is that that's the only way to work with time. And so this dominant way to work with time always reminds me of apples. The United States has more than 1,500 apples indigenous to this country. Almost nobody can name more than 20. Most people can't even name more than 10 because those are the ones that ship and travel well. So they get marketed. We know about Macintosh. We know about Granny Smith. We know about Cortland. But what about the other 1,497 varieties of apples? It's kind of like time. We know about Western clock time, but we don't know about all these other ways that time works. And so those of you who have a copy of my first book, 2012, Crossing the Bridge to the Future, will see that I spent almost an entire chapter trying to break down other ways of using time. For example, reverse linear time. Normal time is linear and chronological. It acts as if things begin in the past and move like an arrow straight mechanically to the present and continue moving like an arrow straight mechanically to the future. But there's a reverse linear time where things begin in the future and they move to the present and then into the past. And then there's nonlinear time. My favorite one is what I call rock in the lake time, where certain events have a kind of an impact that when you throw a rock in the lake, ripples to past future. Certain things that happen now change the past and the future in a kind of spontaneous way that transcends linear time, either forward or reverse. So there's just two alternative time streams, for example. And those of you who have done much work with LSD or ayahuasca or things of that nature have entered alternative time streams where how could you possibly know that unless time doesn't move the way that we think we're supposed to think it does? You might meet somebody and in 5 minutes, you might know them more than someone you could have spent 40 years with, because time doesn't move just on a linear track. So Saturn is in Capricorn for 3 years. We're coming towards the end of the first year, 2018, but we still have 2 more years to unbind the Western concept of time. The Hungarian writer Jan Gebser said that our modern understanding of time took as many centuries to create as did the pyramids. It took centuries before we arrived at the current thing that everyone takes for granted. Yeah, the clock. Time moves on a mechanical level, past to future, 24 hours a day, which is also a fallacy. There's not 24 hours in a day. It depends upon how fast Earth rotates. And the great tsunami of 10 years ago sped up the rotation of the planet, which changed the amount of time in a day. And so things like earthquakes and tsunami change rivers and stream beds and Earth's rotation and the amount of time and things like that. So according to Gebser, time is a pyramid. It's a pharaoh. Time has become a tyrant that runs us the way the pharaoh ran the slaves to build the pyramids. It took centuries to create what we now everyone think of, what we now take for granted and very casually as time. If you stop taking it for granted and so casual, and you start to open up timeless time, meta time, trans time, reverse linear time, rock in the lake time, ayahuasca time, you'll be using Saturn and Capricorn's energies during these 3 years to gain more power rather than be a victim of the system, rather than be moved around by collective conditioning. If you can get to something as primal as time and create a liberation there, you'll be unbinding your power as well. So you can gain power by gaining creative ways of working with time. Don't let time push you around like a pharaoh. Don't get caught in the I am 64 years old and therefore this, this, and this. I am not young anymore. I am getting old. It's not that that's entirely false. It's just that that's the 10 apples selected by commercial shippers to eat, so nobody knows of 1,400 other apples. Any questions or comments? Marcella, can you handle the distribution of questions and comments?
I can do that, yes. So if you have a question or a comment, you can raise your hand and I can unmute you. And the way of doing that is down at the bottom of your screen. So you might have to mouse over the bottom of your screen in order to pull up the option of raising your hand. Well, I have to say that this is my favorite all-time topic, is time and the way we can travel in and out and through it. So I'm kind of grateful that this setup is happening.
Yeah. Like I said, I'm just framing the moment of the current cosmic weather report by re-mentioning the way that I've looked at this year. And so I began talking about this stuff with that Facebook video we posted at New Year's. And I've been talking about it ever since. So this is the general background. I'm working my way into what's going on right now. Let's move to what's going on right now, since we don't seem to have questions yet, which is fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so let's take that background as the way that I view the whole year. And by the way, those of you that are astrologically and numerologically interested, my teacher taught me that the best way to understand any given year is to combine its oriental animal with its numerology. And so that's the technique that I use. 2018 is a number 11 dog. And 2019 is going to be a number 3 pig. And in our College of Visionaries and Wizards, as I said, we have 11 numbers rather than 9 in the numerology that we use. And so I take the meaning of the 3 and combine it with the meaning of the pig when I'm going to do my forecast for next year that I'll do around New Year's this year. I'll look at what does it mean to be a 3 year? What does it mean to be a pig year? What does it mean to put the 2 together? So that's just a clue for those of you who like to work with those things. But for now, what I'm noticing is a powerful accentuation right now of the wound, of the shadow, of the karma. And I'm finding this because of something astrologers call septiles, not sex tiles, but septiles. These are a name for one of the main aspects in astrology, which simply means angle between 2 planets. And the septile is the hardest angle to spot because it's not visual, it's mathematical. It's 51 degrees and 4 minutes. And when 2 planets form a septile, it raises the deepest shadow, the gnarliest karma that someone has agreed to work with. And right now, the sun is septiling Pluto on one side and Pallas Athena on the other, 2 of the darkest features of a chart, the harshest karma, the deepest shadow. So the sun is being sandwiched between the most karmic angle of septile and the most karmic planets, Pluto and Pallas Athena. That is the wound, the shadow, the nightmare, the personal hell and the collective hell. Pallas Athena has a lot to do with the personal hell. Pluto has a lot to do with the collective hell. And that's happening in such a way that, well, also what's happening is the planets are forming what we call a catalyst chart, where 2/3 of the sky is full and 1/3 is empty. That's a catalyst. And the leading planet at the cutting edge of the catalyst is Pallas Athena right now. And it's a dark time, but the benefit of this, the treasure and the turnaround, is that if you address your share of the collective wound, of the collective nightmare, of your personal wound, of your personal nightmare, if you don't sweep it under the rug, if you don't deny it, if you don't project it, what happens is you open a cosmic cervix in your own wound that tunes you into being on the cutting edge of collective transformation. And so the great paradox that's happening now is whatever might have you down, whatever might have you scared or self-judging or in a state of living hell about the state of the collective or the state of your own personal life, is also the opening to collective transformation. So there's a real premium right now based on do not ignore your pain, your wound, your suffering, your shadow. Recognize that you're stronger than that. And if you open to that, you're right on the edge of how the collective wants to evolve, how everything wants to transform. And one clue as to how to do that is that the South Node, or the dragon's tail of the moon right now, is in 29 Capricorn. What was once great is now lost. What was once great is now lost. So there's a cue here that something of the past, maybe your reincarnational past, maybe your past lives, maybe the collective past, there's something of the past glories, the past mysticism that you get to regain if you choose to look at your wound, if you choose to awaken in your distortion rather than sweep it under the rug. So this is a powerful time and very shamanic. The specific shamanism of this is that the same thing that might destroy you will resurrect you if you recognize that you are much greater than your own wound. In fact, this is a Capricorn journey, a Capricorn moment. The moment is that we all have greatness within us, but that greatness can only be rightfully accessed if we go through the wound, if we go through the darkness. The Tao Te Ching says, only he who is willing to take on his nation's shame can be its ruler. Can you imagine if Donald Trump took that advice? Instead of disowning his shame and his shadow and making the Muslims and the immigrants and the transgenders the big problem that we have to be afraid of, if he stepped out and said, ladies and gentlemen, I have had an awakening. I realize I have been on the wrong track, and I apologize. I apologize to women for grabbing their pussies. I apologize to immigrants for demonizing them. I apologize to the American Indians for stealing their land, and I give it all back now. Can you imagine if the modern leaders took the ancient Chinese advice, only he who is willing to bear his nation's shame can be its rightful leader? Wow, what a healing that would be, huh? So this applies not just to Donald Trump, though, but to each of us in the places where we may be caught in wound, shadow, and shame. If we don't shame ourselves for carrying shame and guilt, if we just own it and recognize we're so much more than our darkness, we're so much more than our wound, we're so much more than our shame, we will be on the cutting edge of collective evolution, because the wound is only up because it's time to heal it. The shadow is only up because it's time to transform it. Personally and collectively, both. Each of us is part of the collective shadow because we're human. It's not just Donald Trump out there and Mark Borax here. It's Donald Trump in me. It's shadow in me. Places where I have disowned my shadow, my darkness, my wound, I'm being inspired now to own and look at in order to get on the cutting edge of evolution that's in the same place as the thing that would bring you down. Is everyone getting this irony, this paradox here? I know somebody had some things to say. Marcella, are you tracking with any responses?
I'm I'm tracking. Lily had just pointed out that her south node is also in 29 degrees Capricorn.
Yeah. So Lily, especially because you're having a nodal return right now, because your south node that you were born with is in the exact place that the south node is in again now. This happens every 18 years. Because you're having a nodal return, you are being summoned to retrieve something from your long, dark past that was once glorious and magical and powerful. Strip off of it the disowned wound, own your darkness, and claim your power. Wait, you're muted.
Thanks. I'll also add that for those that are calling in by telephone, you can unmute yourself and ask a question or make a comment by pressing *6. We don't have a super talkative crowd today, it seems, Mark.
No, but the chat thing's lit up. Do you want to check that out?
I already did. I passed it on.
So how do we get rid of it being lit up then?
You just have to ignore it.
All right, okay, I'll just do it on mine. Okay.
Because I can't manage yours.
Okay. So let's do a recap then. We're moving through 3 years of Saturn in Capricorn, asking us to get real about how we deal with time and how we deal with power. And they both turn out to be very much the same thing when you look into them. Year of the Dog is how you serve and how you are served. And the current Cosmic Weather Report about the need for both the collective and the personal shadow to be up, your wound, your darkness, the things you hold against yourself. And so collective wounds irritate personal wounds. So what happens is my misery about the stupidity of the people running my country tends to activate how I feel bad about myself or the ways that I might misuse my power. It's hard to remain immune from collective karma. You know, when the country is going crazy and power is being abused all over the place, it tends to throw out of whack your ability to claim your own power, and even on a deeper level, to just be completely at peace. So the message here is that there's a payoff to owning your own darkness, shadow, and wound. There's a healing involved here. And it has to do with reaching back through the time stream to what was once great, maybe in childhood, maybe in past lives, maybe in family, in creativity, in your dreams, in your walking with spirit beings, with angels. Something is so right, even while so much of everything is so wrong. If you can reach back to reclaim your magical wholeness, even at the midst of everything being dark, that emboldens you to face the fracture, the brokenness, and the wound. When you muster up your wholeness to face the brokenness, you don't fall into the error of making the wrongness wrong. And that's a common error. There's no way out of that one. Making the wrongness wrong has, it's a cycle of self-negation. But when you are unafraid to tackle your own wound and darkness, and you do it from a position of wholeness, your attempts launch a deep journey of the soul. You're willing to realize there's something wrong here, but there's something deeper right here. There's some, it's a really powerful way to handle your humanity, because there is no such thing as a perfect human being. I have never met one. And so you will always have something imperfect. You'll always have something wrong. You'll always have some guilt, shame, lust, desire, envy, depression, sorrow, cruelty. It goes with being human. But when you're able to harness the deeper truth of the perfection of why your soul incarnated into this physicality, and you aim that at what's not right, I think you got best of both worlds going. Because there is this endless source of love coming from cosmos into your belly. Regardless of how fucked up things are in the United States, there's this endless supply of love. We don't have X units of love. We don't have X units of pride, like white nationalists feel when you say Black Lives Matter. They think it's saying that white lives don't matter. Well, who the hell ever said that? Nobody ever said that. When you say that women are great, it's not saying that men suck. and there's not like X units of love. And if Mark Borax takes 100,000 units of love, then there's 100,000 less units for Gray. And now Gray's screwed because Mark Borax hogged it. It's crazy. It's this we're running out of everything modern myth. It's one of the most debilitating modern myths of all. We're running out of everything. We're running out of love. We're running out of planet. We're running out of goodness. We're running out of pride. It's scarcity consciousness, and it has to be healed at the root, deep inside yourself. You have to get the awakening, and then you have to cement the awakening that this is a good universe and good things happen. And there are very good reasons why your soul incarnated into it. Even if many things need to be changed, even if many things are wrong, there's a deeper rightness. Until you get that moment, any attempts you make to redress the wrongness tend to produce further wrongness, because you're not yet sourced in the deep rightfulness of all things. When you source yourself in the deep rightfulness of all things and are unafraid to redress the wrongnesses, you're on track. You're on track, because you're not saying, oh, everything's great, and turning a blind eye to so many things that are wrong. But you're not addressing the wrongness from a place of there's X amount of love, and we're going to all run out. So at such a time when the wound is up now, both personally and collectively, my recommendation is to gain that deep feeling, whether from childhood or from a Beatles song or from sacred lovemaking or from dance or from Buddhism, from something, from a raindrop, from breathing, that this is a good universe and you are here for a good reason. Any final questions or comments?
I'm just noting how this theme of time and timelessness and the way the future calls and beckons us forward, and the way the past brings us back into that wholeness, perhaps, or negation, however we're choosing to relate to it. And it just feels like a strong place where things can converge from a deeper place of wholeness when we're not so caught up in some linear relationship to time.
Yes, if time moves in more ways than the dominant patriarchal machine time, that means that on one time stream, we've already gotten past this delusional phase of Western civilization. It means that you've already gotten past the current personal challenges in your life. Just like in your past lives, or even in your past in this life, maybe you were 9 years old and you were suicidal. Maybe you were going through puberty and wanted to slit your wrists. Well, compared to that version of you, you're their future self. You're here to remind that earlier version of you, honey, we made it. Mm-hmm. It seemed horrible at the time. It seemed impossible at the time, but you know what? We made it. So the you that you are now gets to go back in time and give messages to your child self and your past life self and say, you know what? Man, that was fucked up. That lifetime where they tortured you and burned you at the stake, that moment in childhood that you thought you weren't worth living, you made it through that. You know why? Because I'm here. That's the proof. And similarly, your future self is even now sending messages back to your present self and saying, hey, you know what? We've made it. Yeah, this is a crazy moment in Earth time, but that's not the only time. And so when you unbind time and explore more creative ways to work with it, it becomes one of the main channels of healing and transformation.
Yeah. So I want to open it up one last time. Yeah, Mark, for questions or comments.
Yeah.
And in order to do that, you can bring your cursor to the bottom of the screen, and there's a place where you can raise your hand if you're one of our attendees, and I can unmute you so you can share. And if you're one of our tribal drumbeat members, you're actually able to unmute yourself and go ahead and just pop into the conversation if you choose. Oh, and if you're calling in by phone, you can press *6.
I get a question.
Sure.
What would be the best way to send messages back to the past or to the future? What's the best way to do that?
By opening inwardly to be receptive to the voices and messages that you're telepathically getting and sending. You see, we're all sending and receiving telepathic messages constantly. It's just that Western culture doesn't acknowledge that, so we don't usually notice it. It's kind of like opening to subtle tones and resonances. Sort of like in music. You might have heard a song, you might have heard a Beatles song 100 times, but not really heard it. It's like, now, oh my God, I never saw that the bass line was doing that, or I never heard what the lyrics were really saying. It's like we hear these things all the time, but we don't hear them. And so it's kind of like tuning into a radio signal in the old days before internet radio, where the louder dominant stations would take over and you would get static on the subtle stations. It's sort of like tuning the radio. So you're not always hearing the dominant signals that are on the telepathic wavelengths, but you start to tune into the subtler signals. You might, for instance, have an idea that reminds you of something the boy in you was doing. That's not necessarily just an idle thought. That might be your younger self sending a message to you. Things that we think of as the imagination, things that we write off as daydreaming, might be telepathic messages from your other selves. So first of all, it helps to stop relegating everything like that to just flights of fancy and imagination, and begin to think of them as relationship signals with other beings that might happen to be you, other beings that might happen to be your ancestors. Your ancestors are often sending you messages. Also, people that are dead that are not your ancestors are sending you messages, and you're sending messages. It's just that we normally think the only way to communicate is to pick up the phone, turn on the computer, or talk to somebody. And those are good ways to communicate. They're just not the only ways that communication works. So it means opening your mind to subtle forms of communication that are always happening and starting to tune into them and pay more attention rather than think, oh, that's just my mind thinking about that day I was in school in 4th grade. Mm-hmm. That's a good way to get started.
Yeah, it feels so interesting too, Mark. And I'm going to weave in another question from one of our callers. But the way that we source ourselves from different points of time and place, and the way that creates more of a portal or a connection point to more times and places. So like when I source the younger versions of myself, it feels like it opens up more source points. I don't know how to explain it, but there's something about how when we actually open up to the timelessness, that it just generates more connection points of timelessness.
Yeah. Yeah. It has to do with noticing what an incredible multidimensional being you are. Mm-hmm. That Lily is not just who she seems to be. Lily is a multidimensional entity connected to her past lives, her future lives, her child self, her ancestors, and that all of those channels are always open. It's just that if her focus is mostly on the conditioned Western cultural modern way to be, they're going to remain largely dormant rather than relationships she picks up on. Mm-hmm. And, this is why things like LSD and ayahuasca are incredibly liberating, because they get a person back to how we would all normally be if we weren't walking around with blinders. Western culture puts blinders on human beings from the beginning, from hospital births onward. And we get trained by society and media and education and diet into living a severely, narrowly restricted version of this incredible ayahuascan-like living universe. Things like ayahuasca and LSD don't alter us. They break us out of already being severely restricted by an altered system. Normal life is the altered state. Modern society is the drug. Mm-hmm. Ayahuasca and LSD free us from the drug. It's not that they're only all positive. They can also create other complications and situations. I realize that. But I feel that it's natural to see chakras and past lives and speak with the dead and hear animals talking and speak with stones and plants. I don't feel that's this rare enlightened state. I think it's normal, but we've been shut down. So what we take as normalcy is a severely restricted state, and certain things bust us out of it. Drugs is just one method. And so when you awaken to this incredibly magnificent, multidimensional being that you are, you get to unbind time, work with yourself in much different ways, and pay attention to the voices that are speaking to you, to the ancestors, to your dreams, your clairvoyance, your clairaudience, your clairsentience. Most of us are psychic in one way, stronger than other ways. I am more clairsentient than I am clairvoyant or clairaudient. In other words, I feel things that are coming from other parts of the world and other time zones, much more than I usually see them or hear them. Sometimes I'm clairvoyant and sometimes I'm clairaudient, but mostly I'm clairsentient. I just feel it. And it helps to notice the way your super sensible senses work, the things that are outlawed by Western culture. Notice, what your heart is telling you, and maybe what your dead grandmother is telling you. And maybe speak to your unborn children. Talk to people who are alive now, but in some other part of the world than you. You're already doing it anyway. It's more like just unbind yourself from this idea that there are 5 senses, which Rudolf Steiner challenged. He said there's 12 senses. And so this idea that the Greeks came up with, that there are 5 senses, why is that true? Just because Aristotle said it? Just because modern science believes it? Oh, therefore it's true. Well, yeah, because it's written in textbooks. There's 5 senses. It's same thing with time. Don't be willing to stay locked into restricted concepts like there's only 5 senses and there's only one way that time moves and anything else is preposterous.
And speaking of time, that's a perfect introduction to this question. We had one of our attendees ask if you would just go ahead and repeat the 3 constructs of time.
Well, I'm just pointing out some others that I know of. Normal time might be considered chronological linear time. It moves like a straight line from past to present to future in mechanical increments, like the clock. But there's a reverse linear time, which is linear, but it starts in the future and goes to the present and then the past. And then there's what I call rock in the lake time, where incidents, like you meet somebody. This kind of stuff happens to me at the Oregon Country Fair a lot, where I meet someone and it wakes up parts of me in my past and future. It's like certain occurrences or meetings or incidents are like dropping a rock in the lake of time, and it sends ripples that go past future. It's non-linear. So those are the 3 I was mentioning.
Mm-hmm. I was thinking too, bringing it back to the piece of the astrology that you were weaving in around the wounding and the wholeness. It seems to me like when we are going through the intense rites of passage that life offers us, that brings us into those places of real negativity and real self-negation in extreme ways, that what becomes so scary, at least for me in those moments or during those times, is that I can feel the multiple futures and I can't always feel myself connecting to the one that gives me the most solace. And I can actually feel how energetically I start vibrating, or sort of like feeling like I can conjure one of the more negative futures that I could create, So as a creative being, it is really fascinating when we really open up to how we're not just generating the future from the present, but there's actually living futures that we're in relationship with. And in those moments when we go through a lot of intensity, whether it's falling in love or getting divorced, or going through some deep healing process, it just feels like all that really opens up in a totally new way, which brings forward both the fear and ecstasy of what's possible.
It's like any other muscle. The more you begin to work with the idea of unbinding time, the more skillful you'll become at it. And just even the idea that you can unbind time and work with it differently is a revelation to most people. And even just swallowing that and digesting it and remembering it will already begin to tune you in to the multidimensional rather than the monodimensional. And so the more you tune into it and play with it and work with it and exercise it like any other muscle, you'll get stronger at it. And the thing you mentioned about things we hold against ourselves, self-judgment, self-negation, this is key, because the only reason groups of people can be subjugated by dominant power forms of wrongness is because internally they're subjugating themselves and making themselves wrong. When a person stops making themselves wrong, when a person stops negating their true nature, they start to develop an immunity to being pushed around by any dominant thought forms of false power. So this is the way that personal healing breakthrough is social liberation. It's not only for yourself that you need to fall in love with yourself and awaken to your multidimensional nature. It's because you free up the collective when you break out of the dominant culture, false power stories and thought forms. You're healing the collective when you come into the idea of how beautiful everything is and how right you are. Not that you're always right and everyone else is wrong, but that your basic existence needs to stop being contested territory. Mm-hmm. That your basic right to exist in that body at this time on Earth can no longer gets to be contested territory by you or anyone else. You get to exist as much as a star gets to exist, and a galaxy and a blade of grass and a raindrop. You exist, period. And when you stop canceling your existence, you open to your integral unity with all things. You get to be a fully functioning part of the universe. You're as much a part of the universe as the farthest comet. You live in deep space compared to the farthest comet. To those beings that live on the other side of the universe, you are deep cosmos. So there's a liberation available at this time that we move through the wound. And thank you, everybody, for joining Marcella and I in the College of Visionaries and Wizards and Tribal Drumbeat with the CWR Live, Cosmic Weather Report Live. We're gathering together a group of new souls who want to enter our 3-year chart study program. We do this every few years. We start up a new chart study program. It's always a very exciting time for us. It means that our current chart study program is winding down now and only has 2 more semesters to go. And Marcella and I are doing readings. I've written a couple books about some of the stuff we're talking about. And what else?
I want to say their titles. One is called Cosmic Weather Report, and the other is 2012.
Right, 2012, Crossing the Bridge to the Future. An exciting page-turning journey through my adventures in love, sex, and astrology. The 3 main things.
And the right to exist.
My right to exist. Thank you all for joining us. What, Marcella, do you have something else?
Well, I also wanted to extend my gratitude to everyone for weathering our new use of technology. We ended up going live on YouTube today for the first time because the Facebook one didn't work. And I apologize for however that added an extra mark in the space for a while. So thanks for growing with us in this way. And thanks for joining us and bringing your questions and your hearts and your listening minds. And I'm just really so happy to have a space where we can have conversations where the word multidimensionality comes up, at least once or twice a call. So thanks again. And I look forward to seeing you all next month. And if you want to join me for the Lunar Musings, that will happen on the first Monday of the month, where we talk about the moon cycle.
Thank you, everyone. Those people who spoke, those people who didn't get to speak, but telepathically spoke. It's so great to have you with us, and stay tuned for more. Take care, everybody. And may your karma turn to grace, and may your multidimensional selves manifest and turn this fucked up civilization around.
Right on.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
I don't know how to unmute the attendees, so